Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Stay hungry, stay foolish. 4 words, and yet somehow they capture everything about a man who changed the world more than almost everyone in modern history. That was Steve Jobs, speaking at Stanford University's commencement ceremony in June of 2005. 6 years later, he was gone, but the products he left behind, the philosophy he left by, and the way he permanently rewired how humans interact with technology, that never went anywhere. My name is Zach Edelman, and in this video essay, I want to make the case that Steve Jobs didn't just build great products. He transformed culture, changed the way that we expect the technology to form around us, and he did it in a way that no one has ever done before, and that no one has replicated since. Steve Jobs was born in San Francisco in 1955, adopted as an infant and raised in Silicon Valley at the exact moment the electronics industry was beginning to take shape around him. In 1976, at 21 years old, he co-founded Apple Computer with Steve Wozniak out of his parents' garage. Within a few years, Apple had produced the Apple II, one of the first mass-market personal computers, and then the Macintosh, the first successfully commercial computer with a graphical user interface. But Jobs' story wasn't a complete straight line. In 1985, he was fired from the company that he built. He went on to found Next, a computer company, and purchased Pixar, which under his leadership produced Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. In 1997, Apple bought Next, Jobs' company, and at that point, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. Within a decade, it would become the most valuable company in the world. That comeback is actually one of the things that makes Jobs such a fascinating figure to study. As professors Hurley-Hanson and Giannantonio wrote in their 2013 peer-reviewed paper published in the Journal of Business and Management, Jobs' career didn't fit any traditional model of how entrepreneurs are supposed to develop. His rise, fall, and return were so extraordinary that they actually proposed a new academic framework for studying entrepreneurial careers, using Jobs as the primary example. They wrote that few entrepreneurs have captured the world's attention the way that Jobs did, and that his story encapsulates the American dream. That's not motivational language. That's a peer-reviewed journal saying that his life was so unusual, academia had to rethink how it categorized people like him. So, what actually sets Jobs apart? Because Silicon Valley has never been short on brilliant engineers and ambitious founders, what is it about Jobs specifically? The answer, I think, comes down to one thing. He cared more about the person using the product than the actual product itself. Samuel Greengard, writing for the communications of the ACM, the flagship production company of the American Association for Computing Machinery, put it well. He argued that Jobs' greatest contribution to computer science wasn't just the technical revolution. It was his insistence on making complex computing accessible and intuitive to everyday people. He fundamentally shifted how an entire discipline thought about the relationship between humans and machines. And you can see that philosophy most clearly on the iPhone.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class.
Before January 9th, 2007, mobile phones were dominated by physical keyboards, tiny screens, and limited internet capacity. The best-selling devices were flip phones, slider phones, and the BlackBerry, all built around the assumption that a phone needed plastic fixed keys that you could feel. Jobs didn't accept that assumption. At the Macworld keynote in San Francisco, he walked out on stage and introduced the iPhone as, in his own words, a revolutionary and magical product. He described it as three things in one.
Three things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device.
The audience didn't fully understand what he meant until he revealed,
These are not three separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
it was all in one device controlled entirely by touch. No keyboard, no stylus, just your fingers on a screen. And critically, Apple had developed something that had never before existed in a consumer device.
With our fingers. And we have invented a new technology called multi-touch, which is phenomenal. It works like magic. You don't need a stylus. It's far more accurate than any touch display that's ever been shipped. It ignores unintended touches. It's super smart. You can do multi-finger gestures on it. And boy, have we patented it.
Multi-touch, a patented, software-driven, user-friendly touchscreen with interactive scroll bars, multi-finger gestures, and a keyboard that lived in the software rather than the hardware. Developers can now build things that were never even imaginable before on a fixed-key phone. The possibilities were, quite literally, endless. Times Magazine named it Invention of the Year, and within months, Apple's stock had doubled. But the iPhone was just the beginning of the story, not the end of it. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store, and that's when the iPhone stopped just being a great product, but became a platform that reshaped entire industries. At Gadget Hacks documented in their 2026 retrospective on the 2007 iPhone launch, companies like Uber, Instagram, WhatsApp, and TikTok exist specifically because the iPhone created the technological and economic infrastructure for first mobile experiences. Think about that for a second. The way you get on a ride, share a photo, message a friend, watch a video, all of it was made possible or mainstream by a device that Steve Jobs introduced less than 20 years ago. And this is what historian Thomas Misa, writing in the journal Science, was getting at when he compared Jobs to Thomas Edison. Misa argued that both men became cultural icons not just because of what they built, but because they appeared at a moment of radical, unsettling technological change and gave it a human face. Edison did it with electricity. Jobs did it with digital computing. Both of them made it something frightening feel approachable, even desirable. Misa also pointed out something that I think gets overlooked. Our obsession with Jobs as a figure tells us something about our own anxieties as a society. The concerns that people had about digital computing, privacy, security, what it does to human connection, Jobs seemed to dissolve those fears through sheer design. His products didn't feel cold or cooperative. They felt personal, intimate even. That's cultural transformation, not just a good product. So how did he do it? What was the actual method behind the magic? Sam Murugesan, an IEEE Life Senior member writing in the Spectrum on what would have been Jobs' 70th birthday, identified 5 key lessons from his career that still apply to inventors today. The most important one: Jobs created things that people didn't know they needed until they had them. He famously said, quote, "It's not the customer's job to know what they want," quote. While most companies were running focus groups and building products around existing demand, Jobs was imagining the future that didn't even exist yet. The Innosight piece by Evan Schwartz, drawing the work on Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, put it this way: Jobs succeeded because his instinct wasn't to focus on the consumer, it was to focus on the job the customer was trying to do. There is a big difference. One approach gives you a slightly better BlackBerry, the other gives you the iPhone. And then there's Jobs' own voice with this, which brings me back to the Stanford speech we opened with. In that 2005 commencement address, Jobs told 3 stories from his life. He talked about dropping out of college and how it led him to audit calligraphy class, which later directly influenced how beautiful the typography of the Macintosh was. He talked about getting fired from Apple at 30 years old and how it was the best thing that ever happened to him because it freed him to become a beginner again, and how he talked about being diagnosed with cancer and how confronting death clarified what actually mattered. His closing line was simple: stay hungry, stay foolish. That wasn't just an inspiration. That was the philosophy that ran underneath every single product he ever made. A relentless belief that the world could be different from how it was, and that it was worth the risk to try. Steve Jobs died on October 5th, 2011 at 56 years old. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything the tech world had ever seen. People left flowers outside Apple stores across the world. World leaders issued statements. Walter Isaacson's biography, published just weeks after Jobs died, sold nearly 380,000 copies in the first week and became a New York Times bestseller. And the reaction itself tells you something. People weren't just mourning a CEO. They were mourning someone who had become, as the Harvard Business School working knowledge site put it in the day after his death, quote, a visionary who forever changed the way we communicate, interact, and live with our lives, end quote. Another author, writing in the IEEE Spectrum in 2025, notes that Jobs' legacy doesn't just feel historical, it feels present. His philosophy of merging art, technology, and human-centered design is still the standard every tech company is measured against. He argues that Jobs lived to see the AI era begin, and he would have been the forefront of it, pushing for AI that enhances human creativity rather than replacing it. Robert Jacob of Tufts University, a human-computer interaction researcher, perhaps said it was the day after Jobs died. He wrote that Jobs didn't just invent the graphical user interface, that was Xerox, but he was the one that proved the entire industry that people would pay a premium for good design. The interface is what matters. That's the experience of a product, and it's just as important of what the product does. Today, the idea seems obvious. In 1984, it was radical, and the fact that it's obvious now, that's the legacy Steve Jobs made. Steve Jobs was a complicated person. He was demanding, often difficult, and by many accounts not easy to work for, but the products he made were the opposite. Simple, elegant, and built for people. He didn't just make Apple a successful company. He made billions of people interact with technology differently. He gave a human face to the digital age, and he left behind a standard for what technology should feel like that the entire industry is still chasing. Stay hungry, stay foolish.